Hi, this is Nicki J. Marcus, and I'm here for the first of my book vlogs, which will be a monthly feature now where I talk about what books I've read during the month just gone. I read 13 books during January, so I'm going to share those with you, just brief little reviews in a moment. Coming to you from my study today rather than my library. I thought I'd try out the webcam, just recording straight onto the computer rather than setting up on my DSLR, but if the quality isn't good enough when I've done this one, then for future months I'll revert back to my older system. I also have to remember to keep looking up and not looking at how my picture is viewing on the screen. I'm going to start off with the ebooks I read and then I'll move on to print. So the first book I read was Prince of the Moon by Derr, which is a gay romance, romance. It's a fantasy story with a fairy tale kind of feel to it. It was a very enjoyable read, not without faults, but still very good, nice way to while away. Couple of nights reading, 4 stars for that one. Another LGBT piece that I read in January was Dreadnought by April Daniels. Again a 4-star read. It's a story about a young boy who's trans and wishes to transition to female and ends up being able to do so when he inherits superpowers from a dying superhero. It's an interesting piece, less of a romance focus, more on the way she adapts to her new body, the way others view the changes that have happened to her, and of course getting used to her new powers and how she's going to use them. The next ebook I read 2 from NetGalley. The first was Fever Dream by Samanta Schweblin, and the next was These Dividing Walls by Fran. I gave 4 stars to Fever Dream, 5 stars to These Dividing Walls. Fever Dream is an interesting piece. It's very much stream of consciousness. The idea that this person's dying and is having this fever, remembering the events that have led to her demise. I really enjoyed it. There's not a complete resolution, I'd say. So if you're looking for a story with a beginning, a middle and an end and it's all very clear, it's probably not the book for you. But if you enjoy stories that are a bit more thought-provoking and psychological, then this is a really good read. These Dividing Walls was a story set in Paris, following the lives of a group of very disparate individuals who live within the same apartment building. It's a very topical book for the moment because it's dealing with intolerance, hate crimes. It's an enjoyable read on many levels, both for the individual stories of these beautifully drawn characters, but also for the message that is underneath that. Next, another 4-star read was One Sip at a Time by Keith Van Sickle. This book is his tale of being an American who decides he wants to, with his wife, go and spend part of every year living in France, in Provence. And it's a sort of anecdotal Bill Bryson style piece, talking about how he had to learn French and all the little stories about how he was settling into both his first and second long stays out there. If you like travel writing, you're interested in France, and you just want a humorous, enjoyable little read, then this is a great book. The next one I read was a departure for me from my usual reading style because it was a graphic novel. It's called Finding Molly, An Adventure in Catsitting. Written by Justin Prado and drawn by Jenn St-Onge. I really enjoyed it. It's a 4-star read for me. The storyline was brilliant, the drawings were beautifully done. The only issue I had was reading it even on the computer. I couldn't have read it on the tablet because I couldn't zoom in enough to read the dialogue, and even on the computer I could only just see it if I made it as big as I could. However, you know, if you bought it in print, or depending on what ebook format you get, maybe you'd have better luck with that, but in print, definitely, really wonderful story. 2 more ebooks. I read Falstaff, Give Me Life by Harold Bloom, which is an essay on basically how much Bloom adores the character of Falstaff in Shakespeare. 3 stars for this one for me, because Bloom obviously adores Falstaff, which is fine, but all his arguments are really skewed because of that. Everything's against everyone else and in favour of Falstaff. I didn't necessarily agree with all his arguments, so 3 stars because it was well written. Bloom's a great Shakespeare scholar. I love some of his other work, but I just felt there was just a little too much favouritism going on in the essay to really be a serious study. I also read another 3-star book, The Pocket Guide to Publishing, which was released by Koehler and Coccaro. This one only got 3 stars for me because it's brilliant information if you're completely new to publishing. If you're writing your first ever book, you want to think ahead about what things you need to organise, things like your editing, your formatting, then it's great. However, if you've already published a couple of books, most of the information in there you'll have already learned either from making mistakes or having researched it yourself before you did your first book. So, moving on, we've got some print books. So, first of all I read Prince Lestat by Anne Rice. An interesting one. I love the Vampire Chronicles. I've always loved them, back from when I first read Interview with the Vampire, including through to the Mayfair Witches. I had trouble with this book. There's too many characters for one thing. I gave it 2 stars because there's so many different narratives going on here. Some of them are new characters we've never met before or have only heard referenced very briefly in the older books. And we don't get enough time with them within their own narrative lines to really get to know them. I didn't like the way Lestat was presented in this book. He whinges a great deal. He's always been my favourite character, but I didn't feel I recognised him in this story. So, based on that and looking at the blurb of the next book, I think the series is over for me. I think I'll enjoy rereading the original ones, but I'm not going to continue with it, I don't think, based on having read this one. The next one I read was the History of the Earls of Orkney, one of the Viking Age sagas. Very enjoyable. This one is a 4-star read for me. It's a fairly easy-going saga, so if you haven't read any of the sagas before, this one was pretty easy to follow in terms of everyone's relationships, who was who, what was going on. So it's probably a decent place to start, particularly if you're interested in the history of Scotland and the Scottish Isles, then definitely a read for you. I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but the next one that I read was the Mabinogi from Welsh mythology. Mabinogi, not sure. Don't ask me to speak Welsh. I've not read any Welsh tales before, so I found it very interesting, particularly the way they relate to some of the Irish tales with which I am familiar. Anyone interested in folklore mythology, definitely a really interesting read, and the translator and editor's notes are particularly interesting as well. Next, I read a book which was my Christmas present from one of my very close friends, Sarah, History of Scotland by Neil Oliver. I love Neil Oliver's TV programmes, and I'm pretty up with my English history, but I've never really known much about the Scottish except for the big periods where it intersperses with the English, particularly for the Stuart Kings onwards. So I found it really interesting. There was a few divergences out to talking about archaeology and geology, which I wasn't sure it was the right book for that, to have them in there, but it was still very good. 4-star read again, lots of 4-star reads during January, but yeah, definitely worth a read if you're into history, want to know more about Scotland in particular. And lastly, but not least, hopefully, Iceland's Bell by Halldór Laxness, the Icelandic author. This is the 3rd book of his I read. I'm a huge fan of his now, can't wait to read some more of his stories. Wonderful modern literature. This one in particular has a saga. It's sort of not a parody of a saga, because it's not, it's kind of modern literature still, but it has a saga quality to the way the characters and the tale are represented and to the events themselves as they unfold. I can't praise Halldór Laxness highly enough. He's an amazing author, so if you haven't checked out any of his work, do. Independent People's the really famous one, but pick up any of them and they're all excellent quality. All the 3 I've read so far have received 5-star reviews from me, and I've got one more here that I'll be reading soon, so looking forward to that. So that's it for January. At the moment I'm reading Strange the Dreamer by Laini Taylor, and I'm also reading a book about the American Revolution, the men who lost America. So I'll be back with those in a few weeks' time at the end of February. Until then,